There's a quiet moment near the end of the 6th episode of Rick and Morty's first season where Morty stands in his own backyard, shovel in hand, looking down into a grave he just dug, and the body waiting to go into it is his. His own face, his own yellow shirt, his own corpse. The show plays it almost silently, and I have never been able to shake it. People talk about Rick and Morty like it's a comedy about portals and catchphrases, but season 1 is quietly one of the darkest first seasons any animated show has ever produced, and most of its worst secrets are hiding in plain sight. Tonight we're going through all of them, episode by episode, from the very first drunken car ride to the frozen moment the season ends on. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we'll be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed, it really does help us keep making these. Let's start where the show starts, because the very first scene of the very first episode is already a dark secret, and the show never lets you forget it. The pilot aired on December 2nd, 2013, and it opens in the middle of the night, with Rick stumbling drunk into Morty's bedroom, dragging the boy out of bed, and pulling him into the flying car. And what does Rick say in the opening minutes of this entire series? He tells Morty he's built a bomb, a neutrino bomb. He says he's going to drop it, wipe out humanity, and start everything over. A fresh start. He even rambles about Morty and Jessica being the new Adam and Eve while Morty panics in the passenger seat. The scene is staged as comedy, Rick slurring, Morty squirming, the car wobbling over the city lights, but stop and sit with what is actually on screen. The first thing this show ever tells you about its main character is that when he drinks, he toys with the idea of ending the world, with his 14-year-old grandson strapped in beside him. The episode lets Rick pass out, the car lands itself, and the whole thing gets waved away. But here is the part people miss, the part that turns a joke into a secret. The bomb is never disarmed on screen. Rick mumbles that he was just testing Morty, that the bomb was a setup, and then, almost under his breath, the show lets you hear that the bomb is in fact armed. Canonically, somewhere in this universe, that device exists, and the series simply moves on. The pilot teaches you, in its opening minutes, the single most important rule for reading everything that follows. Rick says things that aren't true, the show tells the truth around the edges of him, and nobody inside the story is ever fully safe. And the pilot keeps going darker, in small ways that are easy to laugh past. Look at how it treats Frank Palicky. Frank is a bully at Morty and Summer's school, a kid with a knife, and yes, the show makes him absurd. He pulls a blade on Morty in the hallway while monologuing about his family's status. Rick steps out of a portal and freezes him solid, mid-sentence, and walks off to ask Morty about math class. The hallway scene right after is the punchline that hides the body. Summer walks up to frozen Frank, confesses she's always had a crush on him, and the moment she leaves, the ice cracks, Frank tips over, and he shatters across the school floor. A teenager dies in the pilot. He dies because Rick couldn't be bothered to unfreeze him. And the show never mentions Frank Palicky again. No funeral, no news report, no consequence. Read this way. The pilot is making its thesis statement twice in one episode. First with the bomb, then with Frank. Rick's casual relationship with other people's lives is not a flaw the show plans to fix. It is the weather of this universe, and everyone in the Smith house is living under it. There's one more secret buried in the pilot, and it's about Morty himself, because the episode is built around a lie the family tells itself. Beth and Jerry spend the episode arguing about whether Rick is a bad influence, and the school principal reveals that Morty has only attended a handful of hours of class in 2 months. Morty's parents are shocked, and that shock is the secret. Morty has been disappearing from his own life for months, in plain sight, and the people who live with him did not notice until an outsider said it out loud. The show frames the Smith family as comically dysfunctional, but the pilot quietly establishes something sadder. A household where a child can vanish into a dangerous old man's orbit and nobody checks. And then the episode ends with Rick, arm around the boy he nearly got killed at an interdimensional customs checkpoint, openly telling his half-conscious grandson that the two of them are going to do this forever. 100 years. Just Rick and Morty. The family thinks they won the argument. Rick knows he did. The pilot ends on a man claiming ownership of a child while the child can barely stand, and the show scores it like a triumph. That's the first dark secret of season 1. The premise itself is the horror, and the comedy is the costume it wears. Before we leave the pilot, there are a few more shadows in it worth holding up to the light, because the episode is denser with warnings than its reputation suggests. Take the adventure itself, the errand that nearly gets Morty killed. Rick needs seeds, Megatree seeds from another dimension, and the day goes wrong, and the only way home is through interdimensional customs, where the seeds will be confiscated. So Rick turns to his 14-year-old grandson and explains, with the weary patience of a man describing a chore, that Morty is going to have to smuggle them, internally, in the most invasive way the sentence can mean. Because Rick has done it himself so many times that his own body no longer suits the job. And Morty does it. That's the part to sit with. Not the joke, the compliance. 5 episodes from now, the show will give us a Morty who pushes back, but here, in the first hour, we watch a child absorb a humiliating, physically violating demand from an adult he trusts. Because the adult frames it as normal, and the show plays his squirming agreement as comedy while documenting, beat by beat, exactly how this kind of relationship works. The customs run goes wrong anyway, there's a chase, there's gunfire, Morty takes a flight of stairs into a wall of luggage, and the two of them barely portal out of an armed checkpoint with alarms screaming behind them. A school night, and then comes the lie that closes the episode, which might be the pilot's most precise piece of foreshadowing. The seeds, dissolving where they were hidden, flood Morty's brain, and for a few shining minutes in math class, he is a genius, solving problems no one his age should touch, while his parents and the principal watch in awe. Rick seizes the moment and sells it. He tells Beth and Jerry that this is what their son looks like with his grandfather's guidance, that the absences from school were an education, that Morty is, as he puts it, gifted, and while Rick is performing the sales pitch, the seeds finish dissolving, the side effects arrive exactly as Rick knew they would, and Morty collapses, loses control of his motor functions, and lies twitching on the floor of his classroom, drooling, unable to speak, while his grandfather keeps talking. The pitch works. The parents fold. Rick's access to the boy is secured, and the price of the proof was the boy's own body failing in public. The pilot ends, in other words, on a successful manipulation, and the show makes sure you see every component of it. The borrowed brilliance, the timed collapse, the adults persuaded by a performance the child paid for. It's also worth noticing what the pilot establishes about the marriage that all of this is happening inside, because Beth and Jerry's first big scene together is an argument about whether to put Rick in a nursing home. And the argument is not really about Rick at all. Jerry wants the old man out of the house. And he isn't wrong on the merits. The evidence is a half-built bomb in the garage. But the show lets you hear the smallness in him too. The resentment of a man who knows his father-in-law looks straight through him. And Beth defends Rick. And she isn't really defending Rick either. She's defending the 10-year-old girl whose father vanished and came back. Defending her right not to lose him a second time, no matter what he costs her household. The pilot sketches. In one kitchen scene, the fault line every later episode stands on. Beth's loyalty to Rick is older and deeper than her loyalty to Jerry. Jerry knows it, Rick knows it, and Rick, crucially, uses it. Because the nursing home conversation dies the moment Beth has to choose. And Rick watched her choose. And a man like Rick only needs to see that once. There's even a small sour grace note in where Beth's life has landed. A brilliant woman working as a heart surgeon for horses, fiercely insisting on the word surgeon while the world hears the word horse. Her unfinished ambitions sitting at the dinner table like an extra guest. The show will eventually say out loud whose disappearance derailed her. But the pilot already shows you, in the way she fights for him, that the person who broke her trajectory is the person she cannot stand to lose. One last detail from the first episode, small and almost sweet. and then we'll move on. Jessica, the girl Morty daydreams about, the reason his half-awake mind can be steered anywhere. The pilot introduces her through Morty's fantasy in math class, and the fantasy itself is innocent and a little sad. A lonely kid's daydream of being chosen. But notice what the show does with it. Rick's drunken bomb plan in the opening scene already had Jessica's name in it, already imagined disposing of the world and keeping her, like an item on a list. The very first episode uses the same girl twice, once as a boy's tender daydream and once as a madman's inventory, and never comments on the rhyme. That's the pilot in miniature. The same universe, the same people, the same night, holding both readings at once, and the show trusting you to notice that the difference between a love story and a horror story in this world is mostly a question of which character is holding the controls. The second episode, Lawnmower Dog, looks like the safe one. It's the dog episode, the one people remember for a robot helmet and a cartoon nightmare villain. But sit inside it for a while, and it might be the most quietly upsetting half hour of the season. Because it's the episode where the show first asks what happens when something powerless suddenly understands its own life. The setup is simple. Jerry complains that the family dog Snuffles is stupid, because the dog keeps relieving himself on the carpet. Rick, mostly to shut Jerry up, slaps a cognition-amplifying helmet on the dog. And the first thing intelligent Snuffles does is not a joke. He becomes aware. He starts asking questions. And the question he lands on, the one the episode is genuinely built around, is the one he asks Summer in the middle of the night, standing in her doorway in his little walker, demanding to know where his testicles went. It's played for shock laughter, and it is funny, but listen to what is actually being said. A creature has just become smart enough to realize that the people he loves had parts of his body removed without his consent, before he could understand, and that they did it for their own convenience. The episode's comedy engine is a being waking up inside a life that was decided for him. In canon, what follows is an uprising. Snuffles renames himself Snowball because, as he explains, his fur is pretty and white, and he builds more helmets, and within a day, the dogs of the neighborhood are organized, armed, and in charge. Humanity, in this episode, loses, the dogs take over, the family is captured, and Jerry is kept. Leashed as a pet, paraded around in scenes that deliberately mirror everything the family did to Snuffles. The show even has the dogs debate whether to have Jerry neutered, turning the earlier joke back around as a threat. And here is the interpretive read, the thing the episode implies without ever stating. Snowball is not written as a villain. Almost everything he does is a mirror. The cages, the leashes, the casual surgeries, the talk of putting creatures down, none of it is invented by the dogs, all of it is learned from us. The episode is a revenge story where the revenge is just repetition, and that's what makes it land. The dark secret of Lawnmower Dog isn't that the dog turns evil, it's that the dog turns into his owners. Now, the way the episode resolves is its own kind of unsettling. Rick and Morty spend the runtime in the parallel story, diving through layers of dreams to incept Morty's math teacher, Mr. Goldenfold, which is the show openly riffing on Inception, dream within dream within dream. They fall through Goldenfold's fantasy of Mrs. Pancakes, down into deeper layers. And that's where they meet Scary Terry, the slashing nightmare creature with the bladed glove who chases victims through dream space and tells them they can run but they can't hide. And the show does something genuinely strange and tender with him. Rick and Morty hide out long enough to follow Scary Terry home, and they watch him fail. They see him stressed, insecure, henpecked by his own anxieties, falling asleep next to his wife. Then they walk into his dream, and inside the nightmare of the nightmare, they find Scary Terry as a school kid, being mocked by a teacher, humiliated in front of a class. Even the monster, this episode says, is running from something. They defend Dreamchild Terry, win his loyalty, and ride his gratitude back up through the layers. It's the first time the show pulls its signature move, where the most grotesque thing on screen is suddenly handed an inner life, and the joke curdles into sympathy whether you wanted it to or not. But the real ending belongs to Snowball, and it's the part of the episode that I think about most. The dog revolution doesn't end because the humans win. The humans never win. It ends because Rick and Morty enter the situation sideways, and because Snowball, holding absolute power, chooses to stop. Morty is hurt in the chaos, and the intelligent dogs, who genuinely love the boy, are confronted with what their new world is already costing. And the resolution the show lands on is that the dogs leave. They decide to find their own world, somewhere else, and build a society of their own, away from the species that made them and maimed them and then got conquered by them. On the surface, that's a tidy reset button. Read it again, and it's bleak. The most morally serious character in the entire episode is the dog, and the conclusion he reaches after a single day of full intelligence is that humans cannot be lived with. Not fought, not punished, just left. The family wakes up, the status quo snaps back, Jerry gets his carpet back, and nobody in the house seems changed by the fact that they were, briefly, livestock. The episode files itself away as a romp. The secret underneath it is a question the show never answers, which is what we would deserve if anything we kept could ever ask us why. There's more in the dream layers themselves than I've let on, and some of it is genuinely ugly in ways the episode barely pauses over. Remember why Rick and Morty are in Goldenfold's head at all. The mission is not noble. Morty is failing math, and rather than teach him, Rick proposes they alter the teacher. Walk into the man's sleeping mind and plant the idea that Morty deserves passing grades. The episode is so busy being an Inception parody that it's easy to miss what the premise actually is. Two people rewriting a third person's judgment for their own convenience. A small, deniable act of mind control aimed at a man whose only crime is grading honestly. Rick frames it as a favor to Morty. It is, structurally, the same thing Rick does everywhere. The conviction that other minds are systems to be adjusted, and the episode makes the cost visible in the strangest way. Because once they're inside, Goldenfold turns out to be a person. Embarrassing and yearning and complicated. Dreaming of a romance novel heroine called Mrs. Pancakes. Dreaming of being dangerous and desired. Dreaming, in other words, the way everyone dreams. Privately, and the audience is now trespassing in it alongside the heroes. And then the episode shows you something in that dream it absolutely did not have to show you, and chooses to anyway. Deep in Goldenfold's layered fantasy, among the projections his sleeping mind has conjured, there is a version of Summer, Morty's sister, the man's own student, dressed and presented in a way that no teacher's subconscious should ever present a child in his care, and the show puts Morty in the room with it, makes him recognize his sister in his teacher's dream, and lets the horror land on his face with almost no joke to cushion it. Rick, naturally, finds it funny. But the detail is doing serious work, and it's worth saying plainly what the work is. Lawnmower Dog is an episode about what's hiding inside the minds of the creatures we think we know, and it runs the experiment twice in parallel, once on the dog and once on the teacher. The dog's hidden interior turns out to contain grief and grievance, and a memory of every wrong done to him. The man's hidden interior contains something predatory that he will wake up tomorrow and conceal behind a gradebook and a pleasant good morning. The episode never arrests Goldenfold, never exposes him, never resolves it. Morty just has to know it now, the way you know things about people you can never unknow, and go back to that classroom for the rest of the season. Of all the quiet damage Morty accumulates this year, the fact that he has seen the inside of his teacher's head might be the most corrosive precisely because nothing can ever be done about it. The resolution of the dog plot has one more turn I held back, and it changes the shape of the whole episode. The year of dog rule, the kennels for humans, Jerry on his leash, the dog city rising, all of it. The show eventually reveals was itself a dream. When the uprising is at its height, Rick's answer is not a weapon, it's the same machine that started the night. He and Morty go into Snowball's sleeping mind and let the revolution play out there. At dream speed, a whole imagined future of dog supremacy compressed into one night so that Snowball can stand at the end of it. inside his own fantasy fulfilled, and look at what it cost. And inside that dream, Morty is hurt, and the dogs who love him are forced to watch the boy bleed in the world they built. And that, not defeat, is what ends the war. Snowball wakes from his own victory and wants none of it. Think about what the episode is actually claiming there. The most dangerous thing you can give the oppressed is not power, the episode suggests, and not weapons. It's a complete, vivid preview of what their justice would cost the innocent, because anyone still capable of love will trade the empire away to undo one wounded child. It worked on Snowball. The episode never asks the obvious follow-up question, which is whether it would work on Rick. Whether there is any imagined casualty that would make Rick wake from his own dream of total freedom and choose to be smaller. Based on the season around it, the answer is one more thing the show leaves lying in the dark. And there's a sting in the staging of that reveal, one of those structural jokes the show buries for rewatchers. The transition into the dog dream is seamless. The episode does not mark it. You watch the takeover believing it's real, weeks passing, the world reordered, and only afterward do you learn you were inside an implanted dream the whole time. Which means the show did to you exactly what Rick did to Snowball, ran a simulation on you without consent and watched you believe it. Season 1 does this more than once, builds the episode so that the audience suffers the same trick as the characters, and it's worth flagging the first time it happens, because it tells you how this show regards you. Not cruelly, exactly, but it will lie to your face for an hour if the lie makes the truth land harder, and it considers that fair play. Keep that in mind. We're going to see it again before the season's over, on a much bigger stage. Episode 3 is Anatomy Park, and this one announces itself as the Christmas episode. Snow on the lawn, Jerry confiscating devices so the family can have a human holiday, relatives arriving at the door. And then, the show hands you its premise, which is that Rick has built a microscopic amusement park inside the body of a living homeless man named Ruben, and that premise is the dark secret, fully visible, dressed up as a joke. Sit with the actual facts the episode gives you. Rick has been keeping a vulnerable, unwell man in a workshop, checking on him once a year around the holidays, and using his internal organs as real estate for a commercial venture. Ruben has almost no dialogue. He gets a weary little exchange with Rick about Pearl Harbor, and then he is, for the rest of the episode, a location. The show never pretends otherwise, and that's the point. Anatomy Park is the season's most literal statement of how Rick sees other people. Not as peers, not even really as victims, but as infrastructure. The plot kicks off when Ruben starts dying, and Rick shrinks Morty down and injects him into the body to help the park staff figure out what's going wrong. Inside, the episode becomes a full Jurassic Park riff, and it's open about it. There's a scientist guide, Dr. Xenon Bloom. There's a small staff, including a security man named Poncho and a young employee named Annie, and instead of dinosaurs escaping their paddocks, it's diseases escaping their exhibits. Tuberculosis gets loose first, and then it gets worse from there. Hepatitis, E. coli, bubonic plague, the body's monsters let out of their cages one by one while the park's emergency systems fail. The canonical chain of events is worth saying plainly, because it's grim. Ruben dies during the episode. The man the park was built inside dies, with children's tour music still playing in his organs. And the staff's response is not grief, it's logistics, because a dead host means the whole environment is now decomposing around them. The show turns a human being's death into a countdown clock, and it knows exactly what it's doing, because it keeps cutting back to the family upstairs having a stilted Christmas dinner, completely unaware that Grandpa is managing a corpse. And then, there's the betrayal, which is the episode's buried thesis about institutions. As the survivors flee through the failing body, it comes out that the disaster wasn't entirely an accident. Poncho, the security man, had stolen bubonic plague from the park's containment, planning to sell it to weaponize what the park kept on display: the escape, the deaths, the collapse of the whole environment. It traces back to a man inside the system deciding the monsters were worth money. Read this way. Anatomy Park is doing the full Jurassic Park argument in miniature, that the catastrophe is never really the creature, it's always the payroll. And Rick's own pet exhibit gets a punchline that doubles as a confession. He keeps defending a pirate-themed attraction called Pirates of the Pancreas, getting genuinely defensive whenever anyone questions it, and the joke is that even with everything burning down, what Rick protects is his idea, not his people. The body count in this episode is real, named characters die inside Reuben, and Rick's reaction throughout is professional irritation, the tone of a man watching a property lose value. The ending is the part everyone remembers, and it earns its infamy. With Morty and Annie trapped inside the dead body and no safe way out, Rick solves the problem the way Rick solves everything, with scale and zero shame. He grows Reuben's corpse instead of shrinking the survivors, and the result is one of the most striking images of the entire season. A gigantic, naked dead man rising over the continental United States, visible from the family's front lawn on Christmas. The show holds the shot, news coverage, screaming, the family staring up at the sky. And then Rick handles the cleanup by having the corpse blown apart in the atmosphere, narrating, almost cheerfully, that everyone is about to see blood and organs come down like weather. It's staged as the season's biggest, broadest sight gag, and it is genuinely funny, but the secret inside the joke is that this is Reuben's funeral. That's it. That's what the man gets. A homeless veteran spends his last years as a theme park, dies hosting it, and is detonated over his own country as a disposal method, and the episode's actual emotional resolution belongs to the family, who put away their devices and hug and decide Christmas means being present. The show ends on warmth in the living room while the sky outside is, canonically, raining a person. Season 1 does this again and again, and Anatomy Park is where the trick is at its most naked. The sentimental ending and the atrocity sharing the same frame, daring you to notice. One more small dark thing before we leave this episode, because it tends to slide past people. This is the episode that introduces Ethan, Summer's boyfriend, who shows up mid-crisis, and the two of them have a screaming argument on the lawn that resolves into a hug, while again, a corpse the size of a country hangs in the sky behind them. The interpretation almost writes itself. Every relationship in this show conducts itself in front of the unthinkable and simply edits it out. The characters have already learned to do what the audience is doing, to treat the horror as background. That habit, that learned numbness, is going to become one of the most important ideas of the whole season, and the show plants it here, at Christmas, with the family deciding that the lesson of the day is togetherness. A few more things from Inside Reuben deserve their moment before we move on, because Anatomy Park rewards a slower walk through it. Start with the staff, because the episode is, among everything else, a workplace story and a bleak one. Dr. Xenon Bloom is the park's visionary, the scientist who built a wonder inside a dying man and gave guided tours of it, and the episode grants him the full theme park founder arc. The pride, the denial, the speeches about what the park means, and then it kills him. The founder does not make it out of his own creation. The body he treated as an exhibition consumes him during the escape, and the show grants him only a few seconds of mourning before the survivors keep running, because the environment that's collapsing around them used to be his life's work and is now just terrain. Annie, the young employee, gets the other half of the workplace story, the half about who actually absorbs the cost when an institution fails. She isn't management, she didn't design the containment, she didn't steal the plague, she handed out churros near the small intestine, and she spends the episode running for her life through the consequences of decisions made far above her pay grade. When it's over, the survivors are offered jobs rebuilding the next version of the same park. That's the tag the episode leaves on its own disaster. Not reform, not reflection, a fresh round of hiring. If you've ever worked anywhere, the joke needs no explanation. And then there's the strangest grace note in the episode, maybe in the whole season, the moment with the diseases themselves. Through the entire escape, the body's monsters have been exactly that. Monsters. Tuberculosis as a stalking beast. The plague as a horde. every infection rendered as a creature with appetite and no interior. And then, near the end, with the survivors cornered and a hostile organism closing in, another disease arrives, a towering thing the show identifies as hepatitis, and it doesn't attack them. It destroys the creature menacing them, turns, looks at the tiny humans it just saved, gives them a slow, silent nod, and walks away into the dying body. No explanation. No dialogue. The episode never tells you why. And I love that the show refuses to explain it, because the moment lands like a transmission from a wholly different story. A reminder that even in a universe this show insists is indifferent, things will occasionally happen that look exactly like Mercy, and you will have no framework for them, and you will simply have to nod back and keep moving. Fans have batted around readings for years, that it's a rivalry between strains, that it's random, that it means nothing, and nothing official settles it. I'd argue the not knowing is the point. Anatomy Park is an episode where every system fails: the containment, the management, the body itself, and the one act of grace in it comes from a disease. Unexplained, unearned, and gone a moment later. That's about as honest a picture of how kindness shows up in this show's universe as Season 1 ever paints. There's also the matter of how the episode talks about Ruben when he can no longer hear it, because the dialogue after his death is its own quiet indictment. The staff speak of him as systems, as acreage, as a containment problem. His organs discuss the way engineers discuss a flooding basement. Only Morty keeps tripping over the fact that the ground they're standing on was a person. And the episode uses his squeamishness as comic relief, which is exactly how institutions use squeamishness, as the embarrassing trait of people who haven't yet learned to talk professionally about unacceptable things. By the time the survivors are negotiating exit routes through the parts of Ruben that have ruptured, the episode has fully trained you, the viewer, to hear his name as a place name. Then, it cuts to the family Christmas upstairs, and the contrast does the accusing. A man is being navigated in the basement, while his hosts pull crackers in the dining room, and the show's deepest joke is that you, too, stopped thinking of him as a man about 15 minutes ago. It got you again. It will keep getting you. Noticing the trick is, I'd argue, the entire reason this episode exists. Episode 4, M. Night Shame Aliens, is the simulation episode, and on the surface it's the season at its most playful. A heist plot, a haul of glitches, a long con. Rick wakes up inside a simulated version of his life, run by an alien race called the Zygerians, scam artists of the galaxy who have abducted him and built a copy of his world to trick him into revealing the recipe for concentrated dark matter, the fuel that makes his ship outrun theirs. The episode's comedy comes from the simulation running at reduced capacity. Background characters walking into walls, repeating phrases, a whole city rendered at minimum effort. But there are two genuinely dark secrets in this one, and the first belongs to Jerry. Because Jerry, unlike Rick, never notices. The Zygerians, to save processing power, drop Jerry's sector of the simulation to its lowest setting, and Jerry proceeds to have the best day of his life. His fake wife doesn't argue, because she can barely speak. His fake coworkers applaud his terrible advertising pitch, a slogan about being hungry for apples, because they're programmed to nod. He gets a fake promotion from a fake boss, kisses a fake Beth, and stands on top of the world. The episode lets you laugh at the low-resolution world, and then it quietly shows you the wound underneath, which is that Jerry's standards for his own life are so low that a broken simulation exceeds them. The bar for Jerry's happiest day is people merely pretending to value him, badly, when he's finally dumped back into reality holding a trophy that turns out to be made of nothing. The show plays it as pathetic comedy. Read it again, and it's one of the saddest portraits in the season. The secret of this episode isn't that the world was fake. It's that for Jerry, a fake world was an upgrade. The second dark secret belongs to Rick, and it's the ending. Rick, of course, was never fooled, or at least the episode strongly implies he caught on early. He plays along, he outcons the con artists, and the scheme's resolution is pure Rick. He lets the Zygerians believe they've won, lets them extract what they think is the recipe for concentrated dark matter, and the recipe is a trap. When Prince Nebulon and his crew mix the ingredients aboard their own ship, celebrating, the mixture detonates, and the entire vessel, the entire crew, everyone aboard, is destroyed in a single fireball that Rick and Morty watch from a distance. Count what just happened. A ship full of beings, scammers, yes, thieves, yes, but a species whose defining trait the episode spends its runtime mocking is that they're too squeamish to handle nudity, hardly the galaxy's monsters, and Rick exterminates all of them with premeditation, as the punchline of a heist. The show does not linger. There's a tag, a victory ride home, jokes, but this is the first time in the season that Rick kills at scale, on purpose, as a plan rather than a panic. And the episode's structure is designed so you cheer when it happens, because they tried to scam Grandpa. That's the secret mechanism. Night Shame Aliens teaches the audience to celebrate a massacre by making sure the victims were annoying first. The season will run that play again, and it gets harder to laugh at each time you notice the trick being performed on you. And before we leave the simulation, we should talk about the layer of this episode that's easy to lose inside the heist mechanics, which is what it reveals about Rick when he believes nobody real is watching. Because for most of the runtime, Rick is operating on the assumption that everything around him is fake, including, for a long and damning stretch, his own grandson. The Zygerians, hedging their bets, pulled a real Morty into the simulation alongside the fake world, and Rick, certain he's surrounded by code, treats the boy accordingly. He's dismissive in new ways, casually instrumental, perfectly willing to let this presumed puppet take risks and absorb humiliations that serve the con, and the episode plays each beat as comedy because we, like Rick, assume none of it counts. Then comes the reveal. Morty was real the entire time. Every slight landed on an actual child. And the show lets the realization arrive and then refuses to let Rick repair it. Because what would repair even look like? An apology for the way he behaves when he thinks you're not real would require admitting that there's a different way he should behave when you are. And Rick cannot afford that admission. The episode's deepest cut is the one it plays quietest, that the real Morty got to see, for one full adventure, exactly how his grandfather treats a Morty he believes is disposable, and the answer is not very differently. The simulation was a test environment in more ways than the Zygerians intended. It ran a controlled experiment on Rick's conscience, and the result came back within margin of error of having none. It's also worth dwelling on what the Zygerians were actually after, because the object of the heist tells you something true about Rick that the season keeps confirming. Of everything in Rick's head, the empires of knowledge, the weapons, the sciences whole civilizations would kill for, the thing he guards with layers of paranoia, and the thing the galaxy's most committed scammers built an entire artificial world to steal is essentially fuel, the recipe for concentrated dark matter, the trick that makes his ship faster than everyone else's. Not a cure, not a doomsday device, an escape velocity. The episode never underlines it, but the symbolism is doing push-ups in the background. The most valuable secret Rick owns, the one he booby-traps, is the secret of how to leave faster than anyone can follow. Of course it is. 2 episodes later, the portal gun version of that same secret will carry him out of a ruined world, and the whole season is, in a sense, a study of a man whose genius points permanently toward the exit. The scammers thought they were stealing a formula. They were actually trying to steal the load-bearing wall of Rick's personality, and he killed every last one of them for trying, and if you want a one-sentence portrait of Rick Sanchez in Season 1, it might be that. The exit is sacred. Everything else is negotiable. And spare a last thought for the fake world itself, because the episode's most haunting idea is one it plays entirely for laughs. The simulation's background people, the low-resolution crowd, the man who walks in place against a wall, the woman who repeats her one phrase, they are rendered just well enough to be people shaped and no further. And the episode invites you to laugh at the cheapness. But the cheapness is a budget decision made by the Zygerians about how much reality each person deserves, and there's something in that image that outlives the joke. A city of beings allocated exactly as much depth as their function requires. smiling on a loop, applauding on cue. The episode means it as satire of the aliens cutting corners. It lands, especially at this hour of night, as something nearer to a mirror, because every life has people in it that we render at minimum spec. The toll booth man, the far end of the conference call, the crowd, and this episode is, beneath everything, about what it costs to be the person who decides how real everyone else needs to be. Rick lives his entire life at that control panel. The Zygerians just built a clumsy copy of it, and he punished them for the imitation. Which brings us to episode 5, Me Seeks and Destroy. And now we're in the deep water, because this is the episode where season 1 stops hinting and starts saying things out loud. It's really 2 stories stapled together, and both of them are among the darkest the show ever told. The first is the Me Seeks plot. Rick, tired of the family asking him to fix their lives, hands them a Me Seeks box, a device that summons a cheerful blue creature called a Mr. Me Seeks, who exists to fulfill one request and then vanish. Summer asks to be popular at school. Beth asks to be a more complete woman. Jerry asks for help taking 2 strokes off his golf game. And the show then lays out, in plain dialogue, the rule that turns this gadget comedy into existential horror. A Me Seeks is not supposed to exist for long. Fulfillment is their release. As one of them says it, flatly, to the family, existence is pain to a Me Seeks. They are born wanting to die, and the only door out is completing the task. Summer's wish gets fulfilled. Beth's gets fulfilled. Jerry's doesn't, because Jerry's golf swing cannot be fixed, and what follows is canon, not exaggeration. The Me Seeks assigned to Jerry, unable to complete his task, starts summoning more Me Seeks for help, and those summon more, and the house fills with aging, unraveling blue creatures who have now existed for days, which to them is an unbearable lifespan. They scream at each other, they turn on each other. There is, on screen, a Me Seeks corpse, one of them killed by the others in the spiraling panic, and the survivors conclude that if they cannot remove 2 strokes from Jerry's golf game, they can remove Jerry, because a dead man has no handicap. The episode ends this thread with the mob of them taking an entire restaurant hostage at gunpoint to force Jerry to putt correctly. Now hold the comedy aside for a second and look at what this story is actually about, because the interpretation here is the soul of the episode. The Me Seeks are a portrait of purpose as a curse. They are beings whose entire psychology is a deadline, and the show uses them to ask what happens to anything built for a single function when the function fails. Days of existence drive them to murder, and the episode plays their suffering completely straight inside the cartoon framing. The bloodshot eyes, the sagging faces, the screaming matches about whose fault the continued existing is. And the resolution is quietly devastating in a way people forget. Jerry, the family failure, the man the show has spent 4 episodes humiliating, saves everyone, because Beth stands with him at gunpoint, tells him she believes in him, and her support steadies him enough to sink the putt. The Me Seeks cheer, thank him, and pop out of existence one by one, delighted to die. The dark joke underneath is that the episode's happy ending is a mass disappearance that every participant experiences as mercy, and the warm human lesson that Jerry just needed support sits inside a story arguing that consciousness itself, for some beings, is just suffering with a task attached. The show implies, without ever saying it, that the Me Seeks are a funhouse mirror of everyone in that family, of anyone who has ever felt they exist to perform a function for other people, and that the only difference is that the Me Seeks get to finish. And then there's the other half of the episode, the half that aired with a content warning conversation around it ever since, the story of Morty's adventure. Because the framing of this episode is a bet. Morty, worn down by the trauma of Rick's adventures, demands a turn, a Morty-led adventure. Simple, fun, a fairy tale. Rick agrees, with the wager that if it goes badly, Morty stops complaining, and the show gives Morty exactly what he asked for: a storybook world, a village, a giant's castle up a beanstalk, and then it corrupts every beat. The giant isn't a monster to be slain, he's a homeowner named Dale, who slips, hits his head, and dies, leaving Rick and Morty standing over a body, and suddenly the fairy tale is a manslaughter trial, with a grieving giant widow and giant police. They get out of it on a technicality, and Morty, desperate, keeps insisting the adventure can still be saved, keeps lowering his own bar for what counts as a win. And that desperation walks him into the scene this episode is remembered for. At a village tavern, Morty meets the local royalty, a jolly creature called King Jellybean, and when Morty steps into the bathroom, Jellybean follows him in. What happens next is an attempted assault. The show does not play it for laughs. The framing is frightening, physical, and explicit in its intent, Jellybean attacking the boy, Morty fighting him off, and the scene ends with Morty bursting out of the bathroom, shaking, disheveled, silent. It remains one of the most uncomfortable scenes the series ever aired, and it was meant to be. What the episode does next is, I'd argue, the most important character moment of the entire first season. Morty tells Rick he wants to go home. Doesn't explain, doesn't accuse, just quietly concedes the bet, says Rick wins. And Rick, who has spent 5 episodes performing indifference, looks at his grandson, reads everything in his face, and gives him the win instead. Says the adventure was good, calls it Morty's victory, takes none of the credit, and asks none of the questions. Because he understands that what the boy needs is not an interrogation. And then, as they step through the portal home, Rick pauses, turns, and without a word fires a single shot back through the closing portal and disintegrates King Jellybean. He never tells Morty. He never mentions it again. The show holds the secret between Rick and the audience, and that's exactly what it is. A dark secret in the most literal sense. An execution carried out as an act of love that the loved one is never allowed to know about. Everything the season wants you to understand about Rick is in that wordless shot, that the same man who massacred a ship full of aliens as a punchline is capable of precise, protective violence on behalf of this one child, and that he will hide the caring more carefully than he hides the cruelty. And the episode still isn't done, because the tag scene twists the knife one more time. Back in the fairy tale kingdom, Jellybean's staff discover, in his private chambers, a hidden collection of photographs, and the show lets their faces tell you what the photographs are. And the courtiers, the institution around the king, look at the evidence, look at each other, and decide to burn it, to preserve the beloved ruler's legacy, to let the village keep its hero. That is the actual final note of this episode. Not the putt, not the portal shot, but a cover-up. A quiet institutional decision that the truth about a predator is less important than the comfort of the story. For an animated comedy in its 5th episode, it's a startlingly grim thing to say, and the show says it with no dialogue at all. Fans have pointed to this tag for years as the moment Rick and Morty announced what kind of show it actually was, and I think they're right. Me Seeks and Destroy is where Season 1 stops being dark as a flavor and starts being dark as a subject. The 2 wishes that do get fulfilled in this episode deserve more attention than they usually receive, because each one is a small, sad portrait disguised as a gag. Summer asks her Meeseeks to make her popular at school, and the creature's solution is instructive, because it doesn't change Summer at all. It changes the room. The Meeseeks arranges an assembly, stands a teenage girl in front of her entire school, and conducts the crowd toward her like an orchestra, and the wish completes. Read it as the show diagnosing what popularity actually is, not a property of the person, but a weather system around them. Something that can be installed by a sufficiently motivated blue creature in an afternoon. And notice that the episode never suggests Summer learned anything false. She wanted the room to turn toward her, and the room turned. That's all it ever was. And Beth's wish cuts even closer. She asks to be a more complete woman, a sentence with a lifetime packed inside it, and her Meeseeks fulfills it not with surgery or circumstance, but with attention. He sits with her. He listens. He reflects her back to herself as someone worth hearing over a glass of wine in her own kitchen, and that's it. That's the whole intervention. And Beth feels complete. The joke is gentle, but the implication is brutal. The bar was that low. The thing this brilliant, thwarted woman was missing, the deficit that an omnipotent wish-granting creature identified and resolved in a single afternoon, was somebody in her own house being interested in her. Her wish took an hour. Jerry's took the rest of the episode and a hostage crisis, and the show, in its quiet way, is telling you those two facts are related, that the marriage contains one person starving for attention and another starving for belief, and that neither of them has the equipment to feed the other. And on the other side of the episode, before we get to the tavern, Morty's fairy tale deserves one more beat too. Because the giant's death scene is the season doing something subtle with the idea of justice. When the giant Dale slips and dies, Rick and Morty are arrested by giant police, processed by a giant legal system, tried in a giant court. And the show plays the whole apparatus completely straight, rights, procedure, a grieving widow shouting from the gallery. They get off on a technicality, a procedural error by the arresting officers, and walk free through a courthouse of beings who believe, not unreasonably, that two small intruders killed a husband and father and beat the system. Here's why that matters. Morty asked for a fairy tale, and fairy tales run on moral physics: the wicked punished, the good rewarded, the giant slain because giants deserve slaying. What Morty's adventure delivers instead is the real world's physics, where a death is an accident is a case, and a case is decided by paperwork, where outcomes attach to procedure rather than to goodness. Every step away from the storybook is a step toward the bathroom door at the tavern, and I think that's deliberate. The episode strips Morty's protections in order: first the moral logic, then the safety. And what makes the jellybean scene land as hard as it does is that by the time it arrives, the fairy tale has already taught Morty, and us, that nothing in this world is enforcing the rules he came in believing. The attack isn't a tonal break from the whimsy, it's where the whimsy was headed, once the moral floor was out. There's one more thing to say about the wager that frames it all, because the bet between Rick and Morty quietly poisons every scene it touches. Rick agreed to the Morty-led adventure on terms. If it goes badly, Morty surrenders his right to complain. Which means that all episode long, every setback is worth something to Rick, every disaster pays him. The show lets you feel that incentive humming under his behavior, the way he narrates each failure with a collector's satisfaction, and it makes his final act, handing the victory back. Mean, more than generosity, usually means. Rick doesn't just comfort Morty at the end. He pays out a bet he had legitimately won, voids his own jackpot, because he saw the price his grandson had paid for it. For a man who treats every interaction as a ledger, it's the closest thing to a love letter the season has shown so far, and it's written entirely in the currency of a forfeited told you so. Then comes episode 6, Rick Potion number 9. And there's no way around it, this is the one, the episode the entire series pivots on, the dark secret so big that every season afterward lives in its shadow. It starts small, almost sweetly. There's a school dance, a flu season dance, and Morty wants Jessica to notice him, and he begs Rick for help. Rick, annoyed, whips up a serum from the oxytocin of a vole, an animal that mates for life, a little vial of guaranteed love, and warns him, almost in passing, not to use it on anyone with the flu. Morty uses it at the flu season dance, and the chemistry does what Rick warned it would. The serum piggybacks on the virus, goes airborne, and by the end of the night everyone infected is obsessively, violently in love with Morty, a whole town converging on one terrified 14-year-old. Rick's fix makes it worse. The antidote built from Mantis Dina turns the lovesick into Mantis people who still love Morty but also want to devour him. And the fix for the fix is worse again. Rick throws everything into one final serum, and the result is total. The entire population of Earth, except for the genetically shielded Smith family, collapses into shapeless, howling masses of flesh and limbs. The show names them Cronenbergs, after the director, and it is open body horror, the whole planet turned inside out by a chain of shortcuts that started with a boy wanting a girl to like him. And here is where the episode does the thing no one watching in 2014 was prepared for. Rick does not fix it. He can't. He says so. And so, he does the other thing. The thing that becomes the show's deepest wound. He scans the infinite realities for a universe where two conditions are true. A universe where he found the cure, and where? Shortly afterward. Both he and Morty died in an accident. He opens a portal, and he and Morty step out of their ruined world and into that one, into a tidy suburban backyard where their own corpses are lying on the lawn. And then comes the scene I opened tonight with. They dig two graves. Rick handles it like a chore. Morty has to drag his own dead body across the grass, has to look into its open eyes, and bury himself, and then walk inside and sit on the couch in a house that is almost exactly his house, with a family that is almost exactly his family, who will never know the difference. The camera holds on Morty's blank, traumatized stare as the episode simply ends, with life going on around him. Scored with a quiet song. No joke to let you off the hook. So let's say the canonical facts of this plainly, because they are the dark secret at the center of the entire series. The Rick and Morty you watch from episode 6 onward are not living in their original universe. Their original world was not saved. It is still out there, canonically a planet of Cronenberg horror where Beth, Jerry, and Summer survive in the wreckage, abandoned, because Rick's solution did not include them. The Beth, Jerry, and Summer we watch from this episode forward buried a son and a father and never knew it, and the boy at their dinner table is a refugee impersonating their dead child. The show never resets this. Later episodes return to it, reference it, build on it, but it is never undone. And the interpretation worth sitting with, the reading that makes this episode the season's true center, is what it says about Rick's entire worldview. Rick treats reality itself the way other people treat possessions, replaceable, interchangeable, disposable when damaged. The portal gun isn't a travel device, it's an escape hatch from consequence, and this episode is where Morty learns that, and where we learn it with him. Nothing Rick breaks ever has to be repaired, because there's always another universe where it isn't broken. That is the most seductive and most corrosive idea in the show, and season 1 hands it to a child with dirt from his own grave still on his hands. There's one more secret folded into the ending. A small one, easy to miss, and the show leaves it as pure implication. In the world they abandoned, the Cronenberg world, the final glimpse we get is of Jerry, Beth, and Summer, armed and alive, surviving together in the ruins, and Jerry, of all people, is thriving. The man who needed a broken simulation to feel successful is, in the apocalypse, capable, decisive, almost heroic, with his family finally looking at him the way he always wanted. Read this way, the show is making a terrible, quiet joke. The end of the world was the best thing that ever happened to Jerry Smith's marriage, and it happened in the universe our characters fled. The grass is not greener in the replacement world. It's just mode. Season 1's biggest episode argues that you can walk away from any disaster if you're clever enough, and then it shows you, in a single shot, that something real might have been growing in the disaster you walked away from. Let's stay in the ruined world a moment longer, because the details of the collapse are worth lingering on, and so is the strange tag the episode hangs off its own apocalypse. The dance where it all begins is rendered with real care. The gym, the streamers, the band, Jessica under the lights, and the show takes its time with the first minutes of the serum working, because the first minutes are the seductive part. Jessica looks at Morty the way he has always wanted to be looked at, and the episode makes sure you see Morty enjoying it, accepting it, knowing it's chemical, and accepting it anyway, because that's the sin the rest of the night grows from. Not malice, just a lonely kid deciding that manufactured love is close enough. The infection spreads through the gym in a slow pan you can watch like weather, and within the hour the whole town wants Morty with a devotion indistinguishable from violence. And there's a horrible clarity in how the show stages it, because obsessive love and mob hatred turn out to need no visual translation between them. The same running, the same screaming, the same hands. The serum never makes anyone angry. It just makes them love him. And the love alone is enough to end the world. And notice the chain of command in the catastrophe, because the episode is scrupulous about it in a way fans argue about to this day. Morty asked. Rick warned, vaguely, and supplied. Morty deployed it, ignoring the warning. Rick's fixes, each one rushed and overconfident, did the structural damage, from mantis people to the final collapse into formless Cronenberg flesh. So, whose apocalypse is it? The show refuses to assign clean shares, and both characters' instincts about it tell you everything. Morty melts down with guilt. Rick files the whole thing under acceptable losses before the screaming outside has even stopped, and starts scanning for a replacement universe with the unbothered efficiency of a man whose conscience has long since been load balanced across infinite worlds. The horror of the episode isn't just the flesh on the streets. It's the speed of Rick's adjustment. The revelation that he has clearly done something like this before. That abandoning a world is, for him, a practice motion, a procedure with steps, and that he performs it in front of a 14-year-old as a teachable moment. Don't think about it, he tells Morty, more or less, as the boy hyperventilates over his own grave. The advice is monstrous and, within Rick's framework, perfectly sincere. It's the only way Rick himself has survived whatever he's survived. The episode is the moment he formally inducts his grandson into the discipline of not thinking about it, and the rest of the series is, in large part, the story of how incompletely that induction took. Now, the tag. After the credits beat of this episode, the show returns to the abandoned Cronenberg world one more time, and it plays the cruelest, cleverest joke in the entire season. A portal opens in the wreckage, and outstep a Rick and a Morty, but wrong, inverted, themselves made of the same writhing Cronenberg flesh that now covers the earth, refugees from a dimension where, as they explain, everyone was born Cronenberged, and where their own great catastrophe turned everybody normal. They survey the ruined, monstrous world our heroes fled, and they fall in love with it. They unpack. They plan to settle. One universe's apocalypse, the show is telling you, is another's promised land, and the joke is airtight and the implication underneath it is genuinely vertiginous, because it means that even the worst thing Rick ever did is not objectively the worst thing. That in an infinite multiverse, there is no ruin without a tenant, no wound without someone whose shape it fits. It's the funniest the show ever is about its bleakest idea, and it's also, quietly, the idea that makes Rick possible. Because a man who believes every disaster is somebody's homecoming never has to call anything a disaster again. And one piece of housekeeping for the lore-minded, flagged clearly as the contested ground it is. The Council of Ricks, a few episodes from now, will address our Rick by a designation, Rick of Earth Dimension C-137. And fans have spent a decade arguing about what that label actually refers to. Whether it names the world he abandoned in this episode, the world he arrived in, or something else entirely, and what that would mean for which Beth, which Summer, which family has been ours all along. The show, in Season 1, settles none of it. Later seasons would poke at the question from several angles, but tonight, inside this season, here is the honest state of the canon. 2 graves in the backyard, 1 world abandoned, 1 quietly inherited, and a numbering system the show deploys with just enough inconsistency to keep the forums lit for years. Treat every confident chart you've ever seen about which dimension is which as what it is, a theory. The only thing Season 1 confirms is the thing that matters, that the boy mowing the lawn from now on has dirt on his hands from a universe nobody around him remembers losing. And before the season moves on and pretends none of that happened, it's worth pausing here, at the exact midpoint of the year, to take stock of the boy. Because the show never will. Not in dialogue, not directly, and the accounting matters for everything that follows. Count what Morty Smith is carrying by the end of episode 6. He has been used as a drug mule by a relative. He has watched a classmate die in a school hallway and attended, presumably, whatever assembly followed. He has seen the private interior of his teacher's mind and his sister's place in it. He has been inside a dying man's body while it failed. He has spent an adventure being treated as a simulation by his own grandfather. He has survived an assault in a tavern bathroom and told no one. And he has now buried his own corpse and taken its place at a stranger's dinner table that looks exactly like home. That is the first half of one season, and the show's official position on all of it is the cold open of the next episode, where the family sits at breakfast and the banter resumes, because the sitcom engine demands the reset, and the genius of season 1. The thing I'd argue makes it a different kind of show than it's usually given credit for is that it honors the reset and refuses it at the same time. The format snaps back. The boy doesn't. Watch Morty's body language across these 11 episodes in order, and you can track the change, like rings in a tree, the flinches arriving earlier, the protests getting quieter, the new habit of staring at nothing for a beat too long before answering. The show never points a camera at the damage and names it. It just stops fully cleaning it up between episodes, lets a residue accumulate where most cartoons would scrub the frame, and trusts the audience's spine to register what their eyes are seeing. There is a version of this series that gives Morty a tearful speech about everything he's endured. Season 1 is smarter than that version. It knows that the truest thing about a 14-year-old absorbing the unabsorbable is that there is no speech, there's just the next morning, and the cereal, and the grandfather honking from the garage, and a boy who gets up and goes. Because the people we love most are also the weather we live in, and nobody files a complaint against the sky. It's also at this midpoint that the season's strange double vision of Rick comes fully into focus, and it's worth naming before the back half complicates it further. Through 6 episodes, the show has now confirmed both halves of him beyond argument. The monster is real, the bomb, the massacre, the abandoned world, none of it deniable, none of it accidental. And the love is real too. The jelly bean shot, the conceited bet, the rescue calculated to the last decimal even while the cruelty runs at full volume. The mistake the show is daring you to make. A mistake half its audience made for years is choosing one. Deciding the love redeems the monster, or deciding the monster invalidates the love. Because either choice lets you stop looking, and season 1 is constructed almost architecturally to keep both true at once and make you sit in the discomfort of it. That's not moral ambiguity, which is a phrase people use when a show can't make up its mind. This show has made up its mind completely. Its position is that a person can be a catastrophe and a guardian in the same gesture. That the hand steadying the child and the hand that buried the world are the same hand. And that loving someone like that doesn't resolve into a verdict, it resolves into a weather report. The back half of the season takes that settled position and starts asking the more frightening question, which is what living inside that weather, year after year, turns the other people into. Keep an eye on Summer, especially from here on. The show certainly is. Episode 7, Raising Gazorpazorp, arrives right after the heaviest episode of the season and pretends to be a breather, a sitcom plot, a gag premise. Morty gets a robot. That's how it starts. Rick, in an alien pawn shop, buys his grandson a gift to stop him whining, and the gift is a sex robot, handed to a 14-year-old in front of his grandfather, played as an outrageous joke. Within a day, the robot has produced an egg, and the egg hatches. And Morty is a father. The child, half human and half Gazorpian, gets named Morty Jr. And the secret engine of this episode is that the show plays the parenting absolutely straight. Morty Jr. grows at terrifying speed. A newborn in the morning, a toddler by lunch, a teenager within days, and Morty, a child himself, has to live an entire compressed parenthood in real time. The sleepless devotion, the toddler tantrums, the teenage rage, the door slamming, the screaming matches about what the boy is and isn't allowed to become. And what the boy wants to become is the problem, because Morty Jr.'s Gazorpian half comes with hardwired instincts, and those instincts are violence. The kid doesn't dream of hurting people as a corruption. He dreams of it as a birthright, and his human father spends the episode lying to him, telling him the air outside is poison, so he'll stay indoors, hiding the world from his son because he's terrified of what his son might do to it. Sit with that. Because it's a much darker parenting story than the wrapping suggests. The episode is about loving something whose nature frightens you, about a parent censoring reality to manage a child's capacity for harm, and about how badly that strategy ages. Morty Jr. finds out the air is breathable from a television program, which means he finds out his entire childhood contained a lie. And he goes through the door, and the family has to chase an enraged adolescent with the strength of an alien warrior through their neighborhood. The resolution isn't a victory, it's a redirection. What stops Morty Jr. is not force, it's an idea. The suggestion that his violent urges could be channeled into creation instead, poured into art, into work, into making things. And the show, in canon, lets that work. Morty Jr. leaves home, almost fully grown after a handful of days, to build a life out of sublimated rage. And the episode later checks in on him as an adult, established, creative, and pointedly estranged from the father who raised him in a lie and is still, biologically, a child. Morty watches his son's adult life from a distance, like a man looking at a photograph of a country he was deported from. The episode files all of this under comedy, and it is funny, but the secret underneath is genuinely sad. Season 1 gives Morty a complete arc of fatherhood, love, failure, and estrangement, finished before his own voice has changed, and then the show simply moves on, and Morty carries it, and almost nobody ever brings it up again. Meanwhile, the other half of the episode is up on Gazorpazorp itself, where Rick and Summer go to return the robot and find the species behind it, and this half is the season at its most openly satirical. Gazorpian society, it turns out, split completely along gender lines ages ago. The males, hyperviolent and mindless, are confined to the surface, where they fight and breed with machines dropped from above. The females live apart in a serene, orderly civilization, having decided the males were too dangerous to share a world with. The episode mines it for back-and-forth satire, Rick scoffing at the matriarchy regarding Rick as a specimen of everything they removed. Summer caught in the middle, and ultimately the one whose argument lands, because she points out that her world holds both and survives. It's broad, it's of its time, and people debate how well it's aged. But the dark detail people walk past is the premise itself. A civilization that looked at half of its own population, concluded that half was unfixable, and engineered a permanent segregation, outsourcing reproduction to machinery so the two halves never have to meet. The episode treats that arrangement as a punchline with a grain of horror in it, a society that solved its violence problem by giving up on the violent rather than healing them, and then it quietly rhymes that with the main plot, where one teenage boy on Earth managed, with love and a lucky sentence, to do for his son what an entire civilization decided was impossible. The secret thesis of raising Gazorpazorp, read this way, is almost hopeful, which makes it unique in this season. It argues that nature loaded the gun, but doesn't have to aim it. And then, because this is Rick and Morty, the episode buries that thesis under gags so thoroughly that you can watch it 5 times and never notice it was there. A little more time inside this episode's house is worth it, because the family's reactions to Morty Jr. are a quiet anthology of everything wrong with the Smiths. Beth and Jerry discover they are, functionally, grandparents, and the show lets each of them fail in character. Jerry's objection orbits propriety, what the neighbors would think, what category of problem this even is, the household's sudden new shape filed under embarrassment before anything else. Beth, who became a mother as a teenager herself, watches her teenage son become a parent overnight, and the episode lets you see the recognition move through her without ever giving her a speech about it, which is the right choice, because Beth's whole character is things she declines to say out loud. And around them, the practical labor of raising the child lands where it always lands, on whoever cannot put it down, which is Morty, who discovers within a day the specific exhaustion the show usually plays for laughs in adults, the love that functions like a debt, the fierce protectiveness of a being who is also ruining your life. The episode is sneaky about it, but it gives Morty every classic beat of a parenting drama: the proud milestones, the fear of the child's nature, the lie told for safety, the lie discovered, the door slammed, the reconciliation that comes one day too late to be enough, and it gives them all to a child, compressed, like a vaccine made from the disease. The robot deserves a word too, because the episode does something stranger with her than the premise required. She could have stayed a prop, the gag purchase that starts the plot. Instead, once her actual purpose surfaces, she becomes a window into Gazorpian industry, a machine built by the orbiting matriarchy as livestock management for the surface males, reproduction at a distance, population maintained without contact, and the implications fan out unpleasantly in every direction. The males are being farmed, the females are doing the farming, and the device that does it is shaped like desire, which means the entire Gazorpian system runs on weaponized loneliness, on giving an abandoned population something that looks like being wanted. The show plays this as backstory, 2 lines of exposition on the way to the satire, but it's the darkest world building in the episode by a wide margin. A civilization that didn't just give up on half its people, but automated the giving up, built infrastructure so the abandonment could run unattended forever. When Rick scoffs at Gazorpazorp, he scoffs at the matriarchy's smugness, at the surface male's stupidity, at everyone equally, because that's Rick. What he never remarks on, and what the episode trusts you to notice, is that a society that manages its unwanted members with comfortable machinery instead of contact is not actually alien to anyone watching. We're at most 1 technological generation behind Gazorpazorp on that front, and the episode knew it. And that was more than a decade ago now, which makes it land differently tonight than it did on first airing. And the ending earns one more look, because the sentence that saves the day is doing more work than its screen time suggests. What turns Morty Jr. from the rampage is the idea, offered in desperation, that his rage could be spent on making things instead of breaking them. And the show immediately, almost defiantly, validates it, vaulting the boy years forward into an adulthood of channeled fury and creative output. Read generously, it's the most optimistic claim in the season that inheritance is not destiny, that the worst thing inside you can be aimed. But the show, honest as ever, prices the optimism. The adult Morty Jr. we glimpse is productive and estranged, successful and visibly unhealed. A person whose art is load-bearing in the way art becomes when it's the only legal exit for what's in you. He made it out of his nature. He did not make it back to his father. The episode lets both facts stand, and somewhere behind them you can feel the show glancing at its own creator figures. At every artist who ever turned a violent inheritance into a body of work and called the transaction a victory because the alternative was worse. Sublimation, this episode says, is real, and it works, and it costs, and it does not reunite anyone. For a half hour that opens with a robot from a pawn shop, that's a remarkably grown-up place to land. Episode 8 is 60 minutes, and on paper it's the silliest thing the season ever did. An episode that is mostly improvised television. Rick installs an upgrade on the family cable box, access to programming from infinite realities, and the show then actually does it. Long stretches of deliberately rambling, half-improvised fake commercials and fake shows from other dimensions. Ants and eyes. Fake movie trailers, nonsense products. The production fact is well documented and worth stating plainly. The creators have been open that the interdimensional television segments were largely improvised, and that looseness is the whole texture of the episode. But 60 minutes is a trap. The improv is the anesthetic, and while you're laughing at it, the episode performs the most painful surgery of the season on the Smith family. Because alongside the infinite cable box, Rick tosses the family a second device, a pair of goggles that let you watch your own alternate lives, the versions of you in other realities, through your other eyes. And Beth and Jerry, the 2 people in this house least equipped to handle that information, put the goggles on. What they see is the secret this episode exists to detonate. In another reality, Jerry is famous, a movie star, the life he daydreams about. In another reality, Beth is a renowned surgeon, the doctor she always insists she effectively is. And in those better realities, the realities where they each became their full selves, they are not together. The episode lets that fact sit on the living room couch like a third presence. Then it goes further and says the quiet part with its whole chest. Summer, watching her parents unravel, asks the obvious question why their better lives don't include her, and the answer comes out in the open, in dialogue, in front of her. Beth and Jerry's life together happened because of her. Summer was unplanned, her parents were teenagers, and the show states plainly that they sat in a parking lot weighing whether to go through with the pregnancy at all. Every version of reality where they made the other choice is a version where they flourished apart. Summer is standing in her own living room doing the math that no child should ever be handed. That her existence is the dividing line between her parents' real lives and their imagined ones. So she decides to leave. She goes upstairs and packs a bag. And this silly improv episode about fake television has quietly become a story about a teenage girl concluding that she is the mistake her family is built on. And then comes the scene that, for a lot of people, is the entire series in miniature, the moment the show's reputation was built on. Morty comes to Summer's room to stop her, and he doesn't comfort her with a lie. He does the opposite. He tells her the truth we watched 2 episodes ago. He walks to the window and points at the backyard, at 2 graves, and tells her that he isn't her original brother, that he'd buried his own corpse out there, that he's a version from another reality who lost his world, and then he gives her the line that became the show's accidental philosophy, that nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's going to die, and then come watch TV. Read flat, it's nihilism. But watch the scene, and the secret is that it's the warmest moment of the season. Morty isn't telling Summer that nothing matters, so she should despair. He's telling her that the cosmic ledger she's using to measure her worth, planned versus unplanned, meant to be versus accident, is empty for everyone. That no one is here on purpose, and that the couch downstairs is real anyway. It is consolation built entirely out of bleak material, hope with no false floor under it. And the fact that it works, the fact that Summer puts the bag down, is the show admitting what it actually believes underneath all the carnage. Meaning isn't found, it's chosen. Usually in a living room, usually with people you didn't pick. The episode then closes the circle with Beth and Jerry, and it's careful in a way people forget. The goggles showed them their better lives apart. And the episode does not refute that. It never claims they were wrong, never reveals the famous versions to be secretly miserable in some neat reversal. Instead, Jerry, in his alternate life, is shown alone, successful and adrift, circling the memory of Beth, and the 2 of them in our reality end up on the lawn, choosing each other again with full knowledge of the cost. Not because the goggles were lying, but in spite of the fact that they weren't. The family reassembles on the couch in front of the infinite television, laughing at something stupid, and the camera pulls back on the season's strangest, truest happy ending. Read this way: 60 minutes is the dark secret and the antidote in 1 episode. It confirms the worst things its characters fear about their own lives, on screen, out loud, and then argues that a chosen life can stand on top of an accidental one. The show would spend every later season testing whether that's actually true. But it said it first here, in the middle of the fake commercials, where it thought you weren't looking. And we should be honest about what's actually playing on that television, because the interdimensional cable itself, the supposedly disposable joke material, is carrying its own freight of darkness, and at this hour it's worth slowing down for. The most famous of the fake programs is a commercial, a manic pitchman called Ants in My Eyes Johnson, screaming deals at the camera while explaining. Between prices, that he has ants in his eyes, that he can't see anything, that he doesn't know why he can't feel anything, and that everything seems on fire. It's an absurdist scream of a joke, improvised, ragged, and people quote it for the chaos. But listen to it again with this season in your ears. It's a man in catastrophic, unexplained pain, performing enthusiasm at maximum volume. Because the broadcast must go on. Because the sale is the job. Because nobody inside the commercial format is allowed to stop and address the ants. He is, In other words, the same sentence Bird Person will translate in the finale. I am in great pain, please help me, dressed as advertising. The channel changes, and there's a cereal commercial where a leprechaun creature is held down by children and torn open for the treasure inside him, screaming, begging, played at full Saturday morning brightness. Another channel, a movie trailer about two brothers, narrated by a voice escalating through catastrophes with nothing underneath it. Jokes built from the rubble of meaning. The family laughs. We laugh. And the episode's quiet observation is that this is what infinite content actually converges on. Pain formatted as entertainment, screams with production value, an endless scroll of beings in distress packaged into segments short enough that no single one of them becomes your problem. The show built its silliest material out of the same dark matter as its heaviest, and then dared you to notice you couldn't stop watching either. The production fact here is worth stating plainly, because it's documented and it explains the texture. The creators have been open that the interdimensional television segments were heavily improvised, recorded loose and animated after the fact, a deliberate experiment in letting unscripted chaos into a scripted show. And that choice rhymes with the episode's own subject in a way I doubt was fully accidental. The improv segments are the only part of the season where nobody, not even the writers, knew where a sentence was going when it started, and the episode that contains them is the one about infinite unwritten lives, about all the versions of yourself that exist off script. The polished, fully authored material in this episode is the painful part, the goggles, the marriage, the parking lot. The free, unwritten material is the nonsense. There's a reading of 60 Minutes where that's the actual thesis, that authorship is where the suffering lives, that a life only hurts because someone is trying to write it, and that the family on the couch, surrendering to randomness, laughing at unauthored garbage from nowhere, has accidentally found the only working painkiller the multiverse sells. It would explain why the episode ends there, on the couch, in the noise. It's not that the television fixed anything, it's that the television is the one place where nothing needs fixing because nothing was ever supposed to make sense. One more pass at the goggles before we go, because the alternate lives have a detail each that tends to slip away. Famous Jerry's storyline through the goggles is not a still image, it moves, and where it moves is the tell. The fame is real, the wealth is real, and the show follows him through it to a breakdown, a flight, a long unraveling that ends with him outside a door, and the door is Beth's. In the timeline where they never married, where each became everything, the episode still routes him back to her, not as romance exactly, more like gravity, and she opens the door. The show is careful not to oversell it, no music swells, it's a beat, a glimpse. But it quietly detonates the episode's own apparent argument. The goggles were supposed to prove that Beth and Jerry's lives diverged into better versions apart. What they actually show, if you watch the whole transmission, is two people whose better lives still bend toward each other at the end. Which means the tragedy isn't that they settled when they could have soared, it's that they might have been headed here regardless, by a longer road, with better scenery. Whether that's comforting or the bleakest thing in the episode depends entirely on what you believe about the couch they end up on. And the show, with what I'd call real integrity, declines to tell you which it believes. It just turns the television back on and lets the infinite noise play them out. Episode 9, Something Rigged This Way Comes, is the devil episode, and its title tells you the register it's playing in. Old-fashioned, literary, a small-town cursed shop story wearing a cartoon's clothes. A new antique store opens in town, run by a courtly, whispering man called Mr. Needful, and the name alone is the show tipping its hand. A nod to the Stephen King tradition of shops that sell you exactly what you want at a price you don't understand. Needful's store gives items away free. A beauty cream, an aftershave, and every gift has a curse braided into it, the classic monkey's paw arithmetic. What you wish for, plus what it costs you. Summer takes a job there, and she adores her boss. And that's the first quiet secret of the episode, that the devil's most effective tool in this story isn't temptation at all. It's employment. It's a teenage girl's hunger to be valued by an adult who tells her she's special. The horror in this episode doesn't arrive through the cursed objects. It arrives through a workplace. And then Rick walks in, and the episode pulls its great reversal, because Rick is the one person the devil's entire business model cannot touch. Rick examines the cursed gifts the way a mechanic examines an engine, identifies the curse in each one with a handheld scanner, openly bored, and then does the single most Rick thing in the season: he opens a competing store across the street. Curse Purge Plus, where he removes the curses from Needful's items with science and hands people back their monkey's paw, wishes free of consequence. The cosmic predator of human folklore, the oldest villain in the Western canon, gets outcompeted in retail. It's a tremendous joke, and inside it is a genuinely unsettling idea, the season's recurring thesis stated one more way. In this show's universe, there is no moral order for the devil to administer, no metaphysical law that says wishes must cost something. There's just technology nobody has gotten around to building yet. Rick doesn't defeat evil, he renders it obsolete, and the devil's actual breakdown in this episode comes not from holy opposition, but from market pressure, from irrelevance, from watching a drunk man with a scanner prove that the price tag on human desire was always negotiable. But the episode's real dark secret lives in what happens to Summer, because the show takes her story somewhere surprisingly real. When Needful's shop collapses, Summer is the one who finds him at his lowest, and she saves him, nurses him back, helps him rebuild, believes in him. They reinvent the operation together as a sleek modern venture, and the moment it succeeds, the moment the rebuilt enterprise is worth something, Needful pushes her out, publicly, smoothly, completely, with the corporate world applauding. The devil's true form in this episode isn't horns and brimstone, it's a founder cutting out the partner who carried him. And the show frames the betrayal in the language of the tech industry on purpose. The oldest evil in the world, the episode suggests, has updated his paperwork. He doesn't buy souls anymore, he takes equity. For Summer, the wound isn't supernatural at all, it's the completely human discovery that her loyalty was a resource someone consumed, and the episode treats that betrayal as worse than any cursed aftershave. Because it is. Which sets up the ending, and the ending is pure season 1. Summer comes home gutted, and Rick, her grandfather, who has spent the episode treating the devil as a hobby and Summer's feelings as background noise, looks at his crying granddaughter and clears his schedule. What follows is a montage, and the show plays it with total commitment. Rick and Summer training, the two of them injecting an alien serum, swelling into absurdly muscled versions of themselves, and then walking into Needful's gleaming corporate launch event and beating the devil unconscious in front of his shareholders. And then, because the episode wants you to understand this was never really about Needful, the montage continues out into the street. Grandfather and granddaughter strolling through town, finding cruelty wherever it stands, a man harassing the vulnerable, a hateful protester, a bully in mid-act, and flattening every one of them in turn while the music soars. It's ludicrous and cathartic, and the secret folded into it is tender in a way the show would never admit out loud. Rick cannot say to Summer that her pain matters to him. The sentence is not in him. So he says it the only way he can, with shared violence against everyone who resembles the man who hurt her. In a season that keeps hiding Rick's love inside his cruelty, the jellybean shot, the conceited bet, this is the loudest version of the pattern. An entire montage of affection disguised as assault. And Summer, riding home swollen and bruised beside her grandfather, looks happier than she has all season, which might be the darkest little detail of all, because it means she's learning the same language he speaks. We should also spend a moment with the episode's other story, because Jerry's subplot here is small and strange and quietly brutal. Jerry, helping Morty with a school science project, plants his flag on a single fact, that Pluto is a planet, and refuses to surrender it even after Morty shows him it was reclassified. And the universe, in this show's fashion, rewards his stubbornness in the cruelest way possible, by validating it. Actual Plutonians abduct Jerry because their shrinking world has a political class desperate for outside voices willing to say Pluto is a planet. And they celebrate him for it, platform him, hand him the applause he has been starving for since the simulation episode. The canonical mechanics are stated outright. Pluto is shrinking because its ruling class is strip mining the planet's core for profit, the scientists who say so are silenced, and the king props up his regime by importing a flattering idiot from Earth. Jerry gets podiums, crowds, adoration, and all he has to do in exchange is keep repeating the sentence the regime needs said. The episode is doing open political satire. A small world cooking itself while its leadership pays for applause instead of solutions, and Jerry is the applause. The dark secret of the subplot is the same one the simulation episode found, that Jerry's need to feel important is a vulnerability that any system can purchase, and the sadness of it is that he half knows. When the activist who tried to warn everyone is dragged away, when Jerry finally admits on the podium that Pluto isn't a planet and is hurled back to Earth in disgrace, he lands on his son's bed, ruined and small, and the show gives him and Morty a quiet beat of real warmth. A father telling a son, in effect, that being loved while wrong felt better than being alone while right. That sentence, never spoken but fully present, might be the most honest thing Season 1 ever says about why people stay inside comfortable lies. The store itself rewards a slower browse, because the cursed inventory is where the episode hides its sharpest observations about what people actually want. Watch what walks out the door. A customer takes an aftershave that makes him irresistible, and the curse writing it takes his potency, desire granted and its purpose removed, the wish honored with surgical spite. A would-be novelist receives a typewriter that produces best-selling murder mysteries, and the curse is that the murders then occur. Art and atrocity sharing one machine. Every page a down payment in someone else's blood. A microscope reveals wonders beyond imagination at the price of the mind that looks through it. Each item is the same joke told 3 ways, that every wish contains its own confiscation, that what we ask for and what we're asking for are never quite the same purchase. And Rick's counterstore turns the theology into a punchline with a power tool. Because Curse Purge Plus does the supposedly impossible, separates the gift from the price, hands a man back his irresistibility with the spite removed, and charges nothing, purely to watch the devil's face. The episode's universe, in that gesture, declares its metaphysics out loud. There is no cosmic invoice. There never was. The price tags on human desire were always handwritten by whoever got to the counter first, and any sufficiently advanced refund policy is indistinguishable from grace. But stay with the customers a moment, because there's a small horror in how the episode handles the rescued. Rick saves them, strips their curses, sends them out the door with their wishes intact and consequence-free, and the show pointedly does not follow them into happiness. The decursed wander the background of later scenes looking unmoored, hollowed by the strange experience of getting exactly what they wanted at no cost, and there's a reading of this episode, which I'd file as interpretation rather than anything stated, that this is its slyest claim, that the curse was never the punishment, the wish was, that what the devil actually sells is the alibi, the price tag that lets you blame the suffering on the transaction rather than on the wanting. Take the price away, and a man is alone with the fact that he asked for this. Season 1 keeps circling people who got what they asked for. Jerry applauded on Pluto, Jerry promoted in the simulation, Summer made popular by assembly, Beth completed by an afternoon of attention, and not one of them is improved by the receiving. The shop on the corner is just the season's whole argument with a bell on the door. And the devil's arc deserves one final note, because the episode does something almost tender with him before it has him beaten unconscious. When Rick's competition destroys him, Needful breaks, genuinely, completely, and the being who has presided over human despair since the species began discovers what it's like from the inside, and the show grants him the full montage of mortal collapse. It's played for laughs, and it lands as something stranger, the suggestion that evil this old has never once been on the receiving end of its own product. That the devil's defining trait isn't malice but insulation, and that 1 week of exposure to ordinary loss nearly ends him. Summer saves him in that state, because Summer is the one smith whose instinct, when she finds something broken, is still to repair it, and his betrayal of her afterward is the episode confirming what it suspects about insulation, that suffering doesn't necessarily teach, that the devil came through his one mortal week with nothing but a business lesson. People like to say pain builds character. This episode's quiet rebuttal is that pain builds character only in characters, and the devil, whatever else he is, was never one. He's a process. Summer mistook a process for a person, and that mistake, not the cursed aftershave, not the typewriter, is the actual horror the episode wants you to take to bed, because it's the only one you're statistically likely to encounter by Friday. And so we arrive at episode 10, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. And if Rick Potion number 9 is the season's emotional center, this is its mythological one. The episode where the show opens the door on its own deep architecture and lets you see how far down it goes. It begins with a murder. A Rick is dead. Not our Rick, a Rick from another reality. Because the premise this episode hands you casually over breakfast is that there are infinite Ricks across infinite realities, and that they know about each other, and that they have organized. A portal opens into the Smith kitchen, and armed Ricks pour through. Agents of something called the Council of Ricks, a trans-dimensional government of Ricks, headquartered in a hidden citadel where thousands of versions of the same man have built an entire civilization out of themselves. And our Rick, the episode establishes immediately, wants nothing to do with it. He calls the council a betrayal of everything a Rick is, the loner who refuses the club made of himself. The council in turn suspects him because someone is murdering Ricks across realities, and the killer's portal trail leads to our Rick's signature. The actual culprit gives the episode its title villain, a Rick the show simply calls Evil Rick, operating from a hidden base, and what he's doing there is the season's most concentrated nightmare imagery. Evil Rick has been kidnapping Mortis, dozens and dozens of them, from realities across the multiverse, and when our Rick and Morty are captured and brought to the base. The show gives you the image that fans have never stopped talking about, a towering dome built of living Mortis, wired together, screaming, their collective agony broadcast as interference. The canonical explanation is stated in the episode, and it rewires the entire series retroactively. A Morty's brainwaves are the inverse of a Rick's. Standing near a Morty makes a Rick effectively invisible to anyone tracking Rick's distinctive brain signature. Which means the boy isn't a sidekick, he's camouflage. The council itself treats Mortis as standard issue equipment, and Evil Rick has simply scaled the principal up hundreds of children in a screaming lattice used as a cloaking device. Our Rick hears his own relationship with his grandson described back to him in the language of hardware, and the episode watches his face while he fails to fully deny it. But the scene this episode is secretly built around happens in a chair. Evil Rick straps our Rick down and rifles through his memories on a screen, hunting for tactical information. And what plays instead is the season's hidden confession. The memories that surface are of Morty. Morty as a baby, in Rick's arms, Morty as a toddler, small ordinary moments of a grandfather and a child, tender, unguarded, completely incompatible with everything Rick claims to be, and the show lets us watch Rick watch them, restrained, unable to perform indifference, his eyes wet while his torturer laughs at him for it. In canon, that montage is the proof, the thing the show had only implied through the jellybean shot and the conceited bet, now stated in images Rick cannot disown because they came out of his own head. He loves the boy. Completely. The cruelty is the disguise. And I should flag, in fairness, that this scene also became the seedbed for one of the fandom's longest running theories. Because those baby memories sit oddly against the family's stated history, and fans have spent years debating what they imply about how long Rick has really known this family. The show, in Season 1, confirms none of that, and nothing official in this season resolves it, so file the theories as theories. What's canon is simpler, and, for this episode's purposes, more important. The memories are real, the love is real, and Evil Rick, scrolling through them, is disgusted, because they're the one thing he doesn't have. Which brings us to the ending, and to the single most consequential dark secret in all of Season 1. the one the show hid in its final minute behind a song. The day gets saved, the dome of Morty's gets freed, evil Rick is brought down, and here is the detail that matters: he isn't brought down by Rick. The captive Mortys swarm him themselves, the supposedly helpless cargo rising as a mob, and the episode lets the image sit there, all those identical boys discovering what they are when there are enough of them. The council closes the case. And then, in the quiet of the aftermath, a technician examining Evil Rick's body finds the truth: a transmitter. Evil Rick was a puppet, a remote-controlled body, and the episode cuts to the real killer, walking unnoticed in the crowd of rescued children, a Morty with an eye patch, who sits down among the others, removes the patch, peels a transmitter from beneath it, and crushes it under his shoe while the music plays him out. The show offers no dialogue, no explanation, no name. Fans would come to call him Evil Morty. And his existence rewrites the episode you just watched, because it means every atrocity in it: the murdered Ricks, the kidnapped children, the screaming dome, all of it was designed by a Morty, the one creature in the multiverse no Rick would ever suspect, hiding inside the camouflage the Ricks themselves invented. As a Season 1 secret, it's almost unfair: a series finale level reveal buried in a first season episode and then simply left there, unresolved, for years. The darkest implication isn't even the violence, it's the logic. Somewhere along the way, the multiverse taught at least one Morty exactly what the Ricks think he is: equipment, a brainwave shield, a disposable accessory, and that Morty agreed to the terms and weaponized them. The season's deepest secret is that its most dangerous mind belongs to the boy the show is named after, just not ours. Or at least, nothing in this season says it's not ours, and the show knew exactly how long it was going to let that ambiguity breathe. And we cannot leave this episode without the other Rick, the one the council itself treats as a punchline, because his little story might be the most quietly devastating thing in the hour. Among the Ricks who descend on the Smith house is one the others openly despise, a gentle, soft-spoken Rick from a dimension the show renders as the multiverse's shallow end, a Rick the rest of them bully to his face with a contempt so practiced it has clearly been running for years. The Doofus Rick, they call him. He is, by every measure the council uses, the failure model, the defective unit, the Rick who lacks whatever furnace powers the rest of them. And the episode then does its great, sad experiment. It puts this failed Rick in a kitchen with Jerry, the family's own designated failure, and the two of them become friends. Real friends. The Doofus Rick is interested in Jerry, asks about his ideas, his hobbies, his feelings, praises his work, bakes with him, treats him, for one afternoon, like a man whose existence is good news. And Jerry blooms. The show lets you watch years of accumulated humiliation melt off him in a single montage of being liked, and it is genuinely lovely and genuinely unbearable, because you know, structurally, what's coming. The friendship ends with the plot, the kind Rick is herded back through a portal with the rest of them, mocked all the way out the door, and Jerry breaks down, grieving an afternoon, and the episode confirms what it has been building toward all season, that in the entire infinite catalog of Ricks, the only one capable of loving a Jerry is the one all the others agree is broken. Sit with the arithmetic of that, because it's the episode's real thesis about its own main character, delivered through the side door. The traits that make a Rick, the genius, the velocity, the contempt, exist in inverse proportion to the capacity for ordinary kindness, and the multiverse has run this experiment infinity times and gotten the same result in every dimension but a rounding error. Warmth in a Rick is a manufacturing defect. The council doesn't hate the Doofus Rick because he's stupid. Plenty of things are stupid. They hate him because he's happy, because he walks around undefended, because his existence raises the unbearable possibility that everything the rest of them are was a choice, that somewhere in the branching of worlds each of them stood where he stands and selected the armor instead. Our Rick laughs at him with the others, of course. Our Rick who we will watch weep in a torture chair 20 minutes later over memories of a child he pretends to barely tolerate, joins the mockery of the one version of himself that never needed the pretense. The episode offers no comment. It doesn't have to. It has already shown you Rick's hidden memories and Rick's public cruelty in the same half hour. And it trusts you to understand that the doofus Rick isn't the defective one. He's the control group. He's what a Rick looks like before the wound. Whatever the wound was, and every other Rick in that council chamber knows it, and that's why the bullying never ever stops. And for Jerry, the afternoon leaves a mark the show is too disciplined to underline. He keeps a small memento of it, a drawing from the visit, and the sight of Jerry treasuring proof that one version of his father-in-law enjoyed his company is the episode's last word on the Smith family's deepest shortage. Everyone in that house is starving for the regard of the same impossible man. Beth for her father, Morty for his grandfather, Jerry for the patriarch who looks through him. And the multiverse, with infinite Ricks on tap, can supply exactly one who pays the debt, and the council confiscates him by dinner time. There are scarier images in this episode. There's a dome of screaming children in this episode. But the loneliest image is Jerry with that drawing, having now met the one Rick who liked him and learned that the universe classifies that Rick as a defect to be laughed out of the room. Some secrets are dark because of what they reveal about villains. This one is dark because of what it confirms about the math. And then, the season ends with a party. Episode 11, Rixie Business, the finale, aired in the spring of 2014, and on its surface, it's the most conventional episode of the run. A teen movie premise, parents leave town, kids throw a party, the house gets trashed, clean up before mom gets home. Beth and Jerry head off to a Titanic-themed getaway. Summer plans a small gathering to climb the social ladder. Rick hijacks it into an interdimensional rager, and aliens and classmates collide in the living room. It's fast and bright and quotable, and it's also carrying the season's last and saddest secret, which the show hands to a giant bird man in the quietest scene of the night. Because the finale is where the catchphrase dies. All season, Rick has been shouting his nonsense signature, wubba luba dub dub, at the end of punchlines, at parties, after explosions, the verbal confetti of a man having too much fun to care. The audience had spent a season learning it, quoting it, printing it on shirts before the shirts existed. And at this party, Morty complains about Rick to one of the guests, Bird Person, a solemn, soft-spoken alien who is canonically one of Rick's oldest friends, and Bird Person tells him, gently, that Morty has misunderstood his grandfather, because in Bird Person's language, wubba luba dub dub is not nonsense. It means, I am in great pain, please help me. The show plays the line completely straight. No sting, no cutaway gag, just Morty's face changing as the entire season reorders itself behind his eyes. Every time Rick screamed his catchphrase at every party after every punchline, he was, in at least one language in the universe, saying the truest thing he ever says out loud. The season's loudest joke was a distress signal, broadcast in plain sight, in a tongue nobody in the room spoke. As a piece of writing, it's almost cruel in its elegance, and as a dark secret, it's the thesis of the whole year. This show hides its pain inside its noise, exactly like its main character, and it tells you so in the finale, through a bird at a house party. And once Bird Person says it, you can suddenly see the rest of the finale clearly, because the episode is full of people transmitting pain on frequencies nobody around them receives. Look at the party itself. Rick, the genius, the legend his old friends toast, spends his own rager getting obliterated, and Bird Person quietly tells Morty the rest of the truth. That Rick is not well. That the noise is not happiness. Look at Aberdolf Linkler, the creature Rick admits he engineered by combining the DNA of Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler, hoping to produce a morally neutral leader, and who instead lives in unbearable tension with himself, two opposed natures sharing one body. Linkler crashes the party demanding Rick acknowledge him, fights, rages, and ends the night sacrificing himself on a hostile planet during a supply run for party drugs, gasping for meaning in his final scene while the partygoers who barely registered him carry on. The show plays him as a gag, a mashup monster, but read him against Birdperson's revelation, and Linkler is the season's pain made literal, a being who exists only because Rick was experimenting, who spends his whole short life begging his creator to say he matters, and who never hears it. Rick built a person the way he builds everything, carelessly, and the person spent his existence in great pain, asking for help, in a language Rick refused to understand. The finale puts Rick's catchphrase and Rick's creation in the same episode and dares you to notice they're saying the same sentence. Even the adult's getaway is carrying something darker than its premise admits. Beth and Jerry's Titanic-themed vacation is a long joke about romanticizing a disaster, a resort where couples pay to reenact a mass casualty event, ice on cue, the ship lowering gently into the water, and the episode openly mocks the idea, with Beth refusing to perform the romance and Jerry wounded by her refusal. But the subplot's actual dark turn comes from a resort employee, Lucy, whose obsession with the film tips into something genuinely menacing. An armed confrontation below deck where Jerry is forced at gunpoint into reenacting the movie's famous scenes. A scene the show frames as real danger, played for horror under the comedy. Jerry is rescued by Beth, and the couple drives home shaken and, in the strange arithmetic of this family, closer, bonded by surviving the vacation rather than enjoying it. The secret the subplot whispers is one the whole season has been circling, that this marriage doesn't run on romance, it runs on crisis, that Beth and Jerry are never more functional than when something is going wrong, and the show will keep pulling on that thread for seasons. The finale's version of it is just the bleakest, a couple that needed a hostage situation to hold hands again. And then there's the ending, the actual final minute of season 1, which might be the most quietly chilling thing the year produced precisely because it's framed as a victory. The party has destroyed the house. Beth and Jerry are minutes away. Summer and Morty are panicking, and Rick, slumped in the wreckage, hungover and empty, mutters that he wishes time itself would stop, and then realizes he can arrange that. He pulls out a crystal, and he freezes time. The entire universe, every person on Earth, every being everywhere, stopped mid-breath so that 3 people can clean a living room. And the season ends inside that frozen world, with Rick, Summer, and Morty repairing the house at leisure, then lounging, watching television, raiding stores, living inside a paused reality where they are the only moving things, and Rick announces, delighted, that he's replacing his old catchphrase. And the last spoken sentiment of the season is Rick declaring that he doesn't care about anything, that nothing matters, played as a triumphant punchline while he sits between 2 children inside a universe he has switched off. Read it with Birdperson's translation still in your ears, and the ending inverts itself. The man who has spent a season saying, "I am in great pain" in a hidden language, closes the year by saying, "I don't care" in plain English. And the second sentence is the lie. He cares so much it's killing him, and his answer is to stop the clock on a reality he can't bear to feel. And the show scores it like a happy ending and trusts you, eventually, on some rewatch, at some hour like this one, to hear what it's actually saying. The cleanup, by the way, is not consequence-free, and the show would open its second season inside the fallout of this exact decision, but that's a story for another night. The party itself deserves one more circuit before we close the season out, because the finale seeds its guest list with the show's future in ways nobody could have clocked on first viewing. Squanchy is there, the small cat creature whose entire vocabulary orbits one word, found mid-squanch in a closet within minutes of arriving, played as the purest party animal in the room, and filed away by most viewers as a one-note gag. Birdperson is there, solemn at the edge of the chaos, the only being present who seems to be attending out of duty to a friend rather than appetite, and the episode gives him the season's most important line and lets him deliver it like a eulogy. And circulating between them is Tammy, one of Summer's classmates, a human teenager at an interdimensional rager, who strikes up a connection with Birdperson that the episode plays as its strangest, sweetest joke, the gravest creature at the party and the gigglest, finding each other over the punch bowl. Years later, The show would return to that punch bowl and detonate everything you thought you were looking at. But that's beyond tonight's season, and I'll leave it where season 1 leaves it, as a sweet oddity at the edge of the frame. What's fair to say within this season is only this. The finale assembles, casually, in the background of a house party, the people who will define the series' future griefs, and it lets them mingle with the audience's guard fully down. Rewatching Rixie Business after seeing what comes later is like looking at a photograph from the last good summer. Everyone is smiling. The camera knows things they don't. Bird Person himself is worth a final beat, because his function in this finale goes beyond the translation. He is the first person in the entire season who knew Rick before. Before the family, before Morty, before whatever happened, and the episode lets that history radiate off him without explaining a frame of it. He speaks of Rick the way veterans speak of each other. With the shorthand of survived things, he references battles, losses, a shared past with edges the episode keeps deliberately out of focus, and his concern for Rick has the specific weight of someone comparing the man at the party to a man he used to know. Every other character this season has had to reverse engineer Rick from the wreckage he leaves. Bird Person is the only one working from the original blueprints, and what he chooses to do with that knowledge is the telling part. He doesn't confront Rick, he briefs Morty. Quietly, at a party, he hands the boy the decryption key to his grandfather, the catchphrase translation, the plain statement that Rick is suffering. And in doing so, he makes a bet that the season has been building toward all year, that if anyone can reach the man behind the noise, it's the child the man keeps using as a shield. The finale's deepest optimism is hiding in that handoff. The old friend, who knows everything, delegating hope to the grandson, who knows almost nothing, but shows up anyway. So that's where the first season of Rick and Morty leaves its world, frozen mid-breath around a repaired living room, and before we drift out, it's worth pulling the camera all the way back. Because the story of how this season exists at all has its own strange shadows. All of it documented, none of it secret, and yet somehow, rarely assembled in one place. The show began life years earlier as a crude internet short, a deliberately offensive parody of Back to the Future called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty, made by Justin Roiland for the experimental short film community around Channel 101. A piece whose entire joke was how far it could degrade the wholesome scientist and kid dynamic of the source material. When Dan Harmon, who co-founded that community, later needed an animated project to pitch, the two of them reached back for that ugly little short and asked what it would take to build a real series on its skeleton. And the answer, it turned out, was a family. The grotesque core stayed, the drunk scientist, the stammering boy. Roiland famously voicing both leads himself, often recording their overlapping arguments alone in a booth, a single performer interrupting himself for hours. What got added was everything around them. The sister, the marriage, the kitchen, the dinner table, and that addition is, in hindsight, the entire alchemy. The secret history of season 1 is that the show's heart was retrofitted onto a joke about heartlessness. That the most emotionally precise animated season of its era grew out of a short designed to have no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and if you want a tidy image for everything we've talked about tonight, the pain hidden inside the noise, the love hidden inside the cruelty, you could do worse than that production history. The show is its own main character. A vulgar exterior, built first, on purpose, and a wounded, careful interior installed later, where it thought no one would look. And for the watchers of margins, the season holds one last unsolved curio, hiding in the one place every viewer looked dozens of times: the opening titles. The season 1 intro, assembled in the style of classic science fiction television, is stitched from action moments, and several of the shots in it appear in no episode. Not deleted scenes, not previews, nothing that ever aired, Rick and Morty fleeing creatures the season never shows, tableaus from adventures that do not exist, beamed into every single episode's first 30 seconds. The practical explanation is mundane and probably true, that title sequences get built early, from concepts and spare ideas, before episodes are locked. But the fan reading has always been better, and the show's own multiverse practically begs for it, that the title sequence isn't from our Rick and Morty at all. That it's a sampler of infinite other Tuesdays, glimpses of the versions of this show playing in other dimensions, and that every week, before each episode, you were shown proof that the adventures you'd never see were happening anyway. Somewhere, to a Rick and a Morty who would never know you existed. Nothing official confirms it, and I want to be clear that nothing needs to. It's the right kind of theory for this season, the kind that's really just a description of how the show makes you feel, that you are watching one channel of an infinite broadcast, and the static between stations is full of voices. And before the final goodnight, let's gather up the questions. Because part of what makes this season such fertile ground for nights like this one is everything it deliberately declined to answer. And it's worth laying the open files side by side and admiring how many a single comedy season managed to leave on the table. Where was Rick? The show's entire premise rests on a return. A grandfather who vanished from Beth's life for years and reappeared roughly a year before the pilot. And season 1 tells you almost nothing about either end of that absence. Not why he left a small daughter, not where the decades went, not why he came back when he did, and not what he wants now that he's here. Bird Person's stray references to battles and old struggles sketch the silhouette of a past. Something armed, something costly, something that produced a friendship with the weight of a war bond, and the season leaves the silhouette empty on purpose. Why did Beth let him in? The season shows you her loyalty, but never the negotiation. Never the conversation where an abandoned daughter decided the man at the door could have a room, and the omission is louder once you notice it, because it means the household's foundational decision happened entirely off-screen, which is exactly where this family keeps everything important. What is the Council of Ricks actually for? The episode that introduces it plays the Citadel as backdrop, a bureaucracy of selves glimpsed in passing, and leaves every structural question humming. Who founded it? What it fears enough to need walls? Why an infinity of loners agreed to a government? And what it does with all those standard issue Mortys when they age out of being camouflage. Who is the Morty with the eye patch? The season's boldest non-answer, a finale-grade villain introduced, established as patient, brilliant, and at large, and then simply released into the multiverse like a held breath, with the show declining to so much as confirm he'd ever be seen again. And the small ones, the season's loose hardware, scattered where only rewatchers trip on them. A neutrino bomb, armed, location unknown. A frozen timeline, ended on, unresolved, every being in the universe stopped mid-heartbeat as the credits roll. A cliffhanger disguised as a punchline. A world of Cronenbergs with 3 survivors the narrative owes a debt it has not yet acknowledged. A talking dog civilization somewhere out there, building its society, remembering us. Some of these the later seasons would pay off, some they'd complicate, and some are open to this day. But I'd push back gently on the idea that the unanswered questions are debts at all. Because I think season 1 understood something about mystery that its own fandom in the wiki age sometimes resists. The show built its world the way you experience your own family, which is to say, in the middle, with the founding decisions already made before you arrived, the old wounds referenced but never narrated, the absent years summarized in a single flinch at the dinner table. Nobody hands you a lore document for your own grandfather. You assemble him from shrapnel, from a friend's stray comment at a party, from the way your mother's voice changes on certain subjects. And you live your whole life with the file incomplete. Season 1's refusal to explain Rick isn't a tease. It's realism. The only kind of realism available to a show about portals. The realism of incomplete information about the people closest to you. And so the questions stay open tonight the way they stay open in every house. Quietly. Under the floorboards of the routine. And the family eats breakfast on top of them, and the show, in its final frame, freezes everyone in place mid-mess. Which is, when you think about it, the most honest family portrait the medium has ever produced. So that's season 1. 11 episodes, aired across a single winter and spring, and underneath the portals and the catchphrases, look at what they actually contain. An armed bomb that never went away. A boy who buried his own body in his backyard and sat down to dinner. A planet of abandoned horrors that the heroes simply left behind. A predator king protected by a cover-up. A screaming dome built out of one child, multiplied. A catchphrase that was a cry for help the whole time. The dark secret of Rick and Morty's first season isn't any single one of these things. It's the pattern, the way the show learned, faster than maybe any comedy before it, to hide its heaviest cargo inside its lightest scenes, to make the audience laugh first and understand later, sometimes years later, on a rewatch at 2 in the morning. That's why this season holds up the way it does. It was never really a show about a mad scientist. It was a show about pain wearing a costume, about a family of people transmitting distress signals on frequencies the others can't receive, and about the strange, stubborn fact that they stay on the couch together anyway. Nobody exists on purpose, the show told us. Nobody belongs anywhere. And then it spent 11 episodes watching people choose to belong to each other regardless, badly, drunkenly, wordlessly, with disintegration rays and frozen time, but choosing all the same. And maybe that's the right thought to drift off on. The universe of this show is infinite, indifferent, and full of horrors, and the warmest place in it is still a worn couch in a repaired living room with the television on and everyone, for one quiet moment, in the same room. Sleep well. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.